I have a few questions. Well, actually, I have a lot of questions, but and some of them we'll submit for the record because of the limited time today. But just to address the corruption problem, even though it may be limited, obviously that's something that has to be addressed so that it doesn't spread. And I know that there have been cases where, you know, the one woman who was found to be corrupt, hanging out the bars with the drug dealers and things like that. Can you describe basically for any of your organizations the methods that you use to try to detect, you know, whether there's potential corruption, whether an officer's being corrupted, and the preventative techniques? I know it's impossible to eliminate it completely. We're talking about a lot of money here, and the potential, you know, is always going to be there. But can you just describe some of the things that you look for? And we can just start and go down the table.
On behalf of CBP, when we have insight into the corruption cases, because DHS IG really is the lead on that, for us it is trying to figure out all the method, manners, and means, and then instill for training. Fortunately, also for CBP, because we have technology using many different types of readers when people are coming through the entry, we can take a look and go back looking at the technology to figure out who was in what lane and when and how, and sometimes when there's been detection of drugs in a vehicle or something, we can go back and figure out who was on the line at that time. So a lot of it's training. One of the challenges that we have is that we are not necessarily always aware of the number of corruption investigations because, as I said, it is usually led by DHS, Inspector General, and with a partnership at times with ICE.
You know, at ICE, there's in the hiring process, one thing is that we hire a lot of our special agents because the requirements, they're coming from other law enforcement agencies, so they generally actually even have a proven track record. So we're bringing them on after they've already had one background investigation. Now they're getting a second check and balance as well. And if they've had any administrative issues with their previous agency, we can actually, you know, remove them from the process. But in addition to that, while you're on the job, I still am amazed that we have over a 20-year-old case management system, TEX. But that case management system, every time you key a stroke into the system, it's recorded. So if you were to run my name, for example, it's going to be recorded. And those things get audited regularly. So that actually can tell you if somebody's actually searching outside of their lane where they shouldn't be looking for cartels to see if somebody's under investigation and so forth. As well as a good, healthy organization to make sure that people don't realize that it's not tolerated at all is by having good checks and balances in your system just on everyday administrative things. You know, ensuring that there are repercussions for the small things that might seem to be a technical administrative violation, but in fact that can perpetuates itself into an environment where people feel that it's okay to violate the rules. So it's really by having a whole, complete approach to integrity.
Senator, you're exactly right. I don't think we could ever, obviously, eliminate corruption, but we could certainly minimize it. What DEA does in Mexico, we partner up very closely. We have what we call our SIUs, our Sensitive Investigative Units. And these officers, these police officers, are handpicked, not only by DEA, but by our counterparts, in this case, our Mexican counterparts in the Mexican Federal Police and the Mexican PGR, the Attorney General's office. These officers are vetted, they're Leahy vetted, there's background investigations conducted as well. They are trained by DEA down in our academy in Quantico, and they really are the best of the best, if you will. We have enormous confidence in them. We have, like I said, since 1973, has had the largest U.S. federal law enforcement presence overseas. And knock on wood, there's been very, very minimal corruption, not only in Mexico, but we have 13 of these SIUs around the world, whether it's Mexico, Colombia, Southwest Asia, Southeast Asia. So again, we attempt to minimize the corruption, and I think we've been, and the Mexicans lately have been extremely successful. There was the arrest, as you know, several years ago in Mexico of someone in the Deputy Attorney General's office who was accepting bribes from one of the cartels to the tune of about $450,000 per month. So again, working very closely with our Mexican counterparts, especially through these SIUs, because that's where we bring our most significant investigations are conducted through the SIU in an attempt to, again, limit and minimize the effect of corruption.
If we could maybe just try to take a larger view. We know, as all the testimony, you know, the reports that we get, they are getting more and more sophisticated. They are, you know, they're kind of like the terror. They are very much like the terrorist organizations. We do one thing, they adjust to it. They're going to constantly adjust. But the bigger picture item is that do we have the resources? Are we putting the kind of resources that we need to protect our country from drugs, from, you know, other types of illicit activities that could come across our borders, especially obviously the southwest border. By the way, I want to I've been down there, and it's extraordinary what you all are doing. It really is. The professionalism, you know, many years ago, it was not looked at that way, but the law enforcement professionalism now on the border is really extraordinary. But the other side of the border is continuing to get worse and worse. The violence, obviously, we hear about is getting worse and worse. And there's a great deal, because the money's getting larger and larger. We have a, you know, obviously demand problem on this side. I think the Mexican government's exactly right that we need to do a lot more about the demand problem. I've actually encouraged the president in his State of the Union address. I wish that actually he would address that, basically, that if you're using drugs in the United States, kind of sending that message from the White House that if you're using drugs in the United States, that you're hurting our national security, that you're funding, you know, these incredibly violent, you know, drug cartels as well as other, you know, terrorists around the world. But looking at the big picture, do we have the kind of resources that we need, and what more, you know, can Congress do? You know, do we need the military down there, the National Guard or whatever? Do we need, you know, more, you know, agents in the various departments? Do we need more technology? Is it more of the fence? Is it more, you know, obviously we you know, between submarines, between tunnels, between everything that you have huge challenges. So taking a more of a 30,000-foot picture here, can you kind of describe, and I just want kind of each one of your perspective on that.
Well, technology is always needed, but trying to figure out what kind of technology, as you said, they change all the time. The tunnel technology has been helpful, but still you can't use something just separately. We need to have intelligence in using that. The submersibles and the semi-submersibles. A semi-submersible you could probably find, especially if you're up in the air, because they have to float at some point. But the fully submersibles, that's a whole different realm in the technology field. It is a challenge. I think that one of the, as Tom Harrington said and Mr. Dinkins, we really do rely and work very hard with our partners down south. That is integral. And actually with all of our military. I mean, I just yesterday spent some time with JADF North and our people that are down there, and they're down at EPIC, and they're helping with us. Not that the DoD solution is the solution, but frankly, we can leverage some of the skill sets that they have. For us, some of the topography in Arizona is much like Afghanistan, so we can look to our DoD partners to find out what technologies they're using that could be helpful for us. So it really is trying to identify what technologies are out there and then communicate with our partners to try to leverage the best technologies that are out there.
Yeah, and that is, we really, I think, then both of you have actually recognized the fact that this is not just a border issue. We just can't, you know, put all of our resources on the border and expect that that's going to be the problem solver. We really have to look at where the root of the problem is, and as Mr. Harrigan mentioned with DEA is, for example, in narcotics, the source of the narcotics can be as far away as Colombia, and we have to ensure that we're working to deal with those threats actually before they hit our border. But also, we also have to make sure that those organizations that are operating within our communities are actually being held accountable for their illegal actions, because that's where a significant amount of the proceeds are actually being generated from. And so there is always, I would say that, we are at all high levels at ICE. I mean, we've grown substantially. We have a lot of resources. There's still room to grow as far as technology goes. There are overseas and deployment of overseas. It's not just, for example, if you can work in South and Central America at the pathways that are being exploited by alien smuggling organizations, bringing up the aliens. It's not just enough to wait for those aliens to hit our border either. If we can change policy, work with our federal law enforcement partners to actually interdict those individuals before they get into Mexico and before they land on our southwest border, we're going to be a lot better off. So as Mr. Harrigan mentioned, they have SIU units. At ICE, we refer to ours as the vetted units. We have 9 of those located throughout the world. They're indispensable because their priorities become the priorities of what the United States law enforcement priorities are. They're there to work for you, and you can trust them because they've been polygraphed, vetted, and background. So there's never enough technology, and I think that we need to continue to push our borders out.
Mr. Harrigan, also, when you address this, just very briefly, does any of the, like, heroin and things coming from Afghanistan, how does that enter into the United States as well?
Well, typically, sir, in Afghanistan, we see, despite Afghanistan being the most prolific producer of opium, produces over 90% of the world's opium, in the United States, we see less than 3% of the heroin seized here comes from Southwest Asia, comes from Afghanistan. Although, interestingly enough, our neighbors to the north in Canada, most of the heroin they're seizing right now, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, comes from Afghanistan. We have not seen it yet here in the United States, but the ones that we have seen, the seizures have been made, have been by couriers coming over, flights from originating in Southwest Asia, transiting through Europe, and then on to the United States, primarily the New York area, JFK. Relative to Mexico, sir, as Donna and Jim alluded to, technology obviously is a key. Every time it appears that we develop some sort of new technology to defeat something the traffickers have, they come up with something new. So again, technology is always key. But I think what we need to keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, is the continued developments of these SIU, these sensitive investigative units. And we can't lose sight of the fact, whenever we talk about Mexico or the southwest border, we need to keep Central America in the discussion as well, because there's unprecedented stress, in my opinion, by the government of Mexico right now on these cartels, by the United States, by the Colombians from south. So we're pushing these cartels, if you will, down south into Central America. So DEA is continuing to build up these SIUs, not only in Mexico. We have 11 offices right now in Mexico, but we also have an office in each of the Central America countries as well. We're establishing vetted units, and the next degree up from a vetted unit would be an SIU. And that's what we need to do to have, I believe, any significant impact on these cartels.
Just very quickly, getting back to the subs issue, is this something that when we get to the fully submersibles, is this something that is going to take the Navy being involved with as well?
Sir, yes, and as Donna had mentioned earlier, we work very closely with the Department of Defense. For DEA, it's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense for Counter-Narcotics, but GIADF South is very much involved. Southcom is very much involved. Yes, we work extraordinarily closely with them, and also our foreign counterparts, the Colombian Navy primarily, the Ecuadorian Navy as well.
Okay, and then briefly getting back to the the ultralights and some of these more remote areas. I'm very familiar with I like to call them remotely piloted vehicles instead of the drones, but because they actually have a human flying them, and they do a lot of those actually out of my my home state up at Creech Air Force Base. But is that some of the technology? More of that is needed with the even the wider camera angles and the more sophistication that they are developing all the time with that flying higher, being able to see more, see at night, the whole thing like that. Is that more the technology you're talking about?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Those are invaluable to us for a whole host of reasons.
Okay.